And let's welcome her, ladies and gentlemen. She's taken time out from a very, very busy schedule.
Distinguished speakers, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me immense pleasure to be a part of the Future Summit by our gracious host, the Nutshell Conference team. I'm indebted to Akhtar, who's always been there, and it is because of his convincing power that I am cutting short one of my other meetings to be with you for a few minutes. I have to apologize. I intended to come at the opening and at the closing, but given my commitments here, I can't make it. So let me lay out to you how I plan to offer my perspectives. First of all, I would not do justice if I didn't talk about the present before I go into the big picture of the of the country, what we need to do, what we ought to move towards. So, as you may all know, the caretaker government has taken a lot of proactive measures to stabilize the economy and build market confidence. At the core of the government stabilization efforts is the 3 billion standby arrangement, which was approved in July 2023. This led to initially disbursement of 1.2 billion by IMF. It also gave confidence to the friendly countries to disburse about 3 billion in bilateral assistance at the same time or a little after that. The state bank reserves, which had dropped down to almost 4.4 billion, equivalent to 1.1 months of import, have now increased to almost 7.5 billion, 1.8 months of import cover as of 13th November 2023. I am hoping that with the news that I'm going to give you, we will have more increments in our foreign exchange reserves, because we have just finished the review of the IMF second tranche, and this has been agreed mutually. And after the IMF management and board have approved the package, we should be able to get another 700 billion. And with that, we are hoping there will be unlocking of the multilateral quick dispersing assistance, which we have already negotiated, and they hopefully will go to the board soon. So I think the first comfort that I want to provide to our colleagues in Karachi, as well as our international participants, that Pakistan is well on the move to strengthen its reserves. As you know, this will restore more business and investor confidence. Just a little word about this agreement, staff level agreement, which we have managed to conclude just yesterday evening. We are hoping that this will take us forward with the efforts that we will be launching, further deepening of our commitment to advance the planned fiscal consolidation, which is very critical for Pakistan. We are hoping to accelerate cost-reducing reforms in the energy sector, whose viability has been threatened by the, unfortunately, reckless policies that we had. We also hope to turn the energy sector viable over the period, and we are launching a range of governance reforms to attract investment, support job creation, while of course strengthening the social assistance program to support the vulnerable parts of our society. There's a lot in this stabilization package. If you are interested, I would refer you to the IMF website, which has further details of the major components of this agreement that we have completed. This is not a signed agreement. This is a disclosure of the IMF to the public about the discussions we have had and the major pillar of the reforms. It's essentially a continuity of the overall SPA framework that we had embarked on, but also it talks about few other areas in order to ensure broadening and deepening of the reforms. So I'm not going to take all the time to discuss the IMF. Let me move towards the other part of the good news, that if we were to complete the IMF standby agreement effectively, we would be getting our economy back on track in the years where we have made remarkable progress. And I want in today's session to share with you what Asfar had asked me is to talk about the big picture, which can only emerge if we implement the SPA effectively. And this big picture has to be on pathways for sustainable development and shared prosperity. For those who are Pakistani colleagues there, you all know that Pakistan has all the requisites of being a major economic player in the region and Asia. According to a World Bank report, our economy could reach almost 2 trillion by 2047 from $350 billion today. However, this requires the formulation and implementation of sound economic and sectoral policies and our determination to actually pursue difficult, challenging structural reforms to achieve the potential of this economy. Unfortunately, looking back at the last 3 decades, the failure to initiate meaningful reforms has meant that Pakistan has fallen behind regional economies in terms of, if nothing else, of the human and social indicators. So, to me, what is the big picture? As you know, once again, after some steady and sustainable growth periods that we have had, we stand today at a crossroads. The decision over the next decade will determine Pakistan's future and its 240 million people's fate. The big question is, will Pakistan rise to the challenges ahead and transform its economy? Of course, I'd like to think we will be able to rise up to the challenges. But what does Pakistan need? Pakistan needs more innovation and diversity in the structure of the economy for sustainable growth. The manufacturing base or the export base or the agriculture basket are all focused on a very narrow range of products and have failed to penetrate new markets because they haven't been diversified. Neither our agriculture, nor our exports, nor our industry, nor our workforce. So effective implementation of ambitious reforms has to touch upon not only these four critical sectors, but more than that, introduce a technological revolution in Pakistan. Effective, as I said, effective implementation of ambitious reforms will depend exclusively on our ability to be able to achieve political stability, institutional and governance strengthening. We need to build stronger institutions to deal with the momentous challenges facing Pakistan today. We not only were confronted with the domestic crisis, which were very specific ranging from economic crisis to climate crisis, and the surge in the global commodities, which also hit our balance of payment. But let me first talk about, after the political stability and some of these other things, I'd like to mention that we should really overall the government's fiscal apparatus so as to lower the revenue expenditure gap. Our tax to GDP has remained low. It's around 10 to 11% in the last 3 decades, with the government forced to finance large fiscal deficit through borrowing from domestic and external creditors. We are crowding out our private sector through our domestic borrowings. What are we doing towards to address this? We are a caretaker government, so we have a limited life. We have developed an action plan for restructuring Pakistan's tax administration called the Federal Board of Revenue. The, to us, the most absolute element there is strengthening the internal governance of the FBR. Over and above, we have a number of areas where we would be restructuring the FBR. And we would be moving towards innovative digital technologies that will help us broaden the tax base and minimize the tax policy and compliance gap. It will help us increase tax collection, and it will reduce the share of the shadow economy, because we will be hunting all the non-filers more effectively, and also the taxpayers who have been underreporting their incomes or their businesses. So there is a lot of work underlying this, but we are counting on us to move faster. And hopefully at some point when we have made progress, I will be able to report back to you. In addition, in the tax area, we are working towards the separation of the tax policy and revenue division and moving it from administrative functions and to be an independent division which will be reporting directly to the Minister of Finance. This will remove the apparent conflict of interest in tax collection. Tax policy has to be designed to be fair, equitable, and productive. The revenue and fairness objectives need to be pursued by expanding the tax base, reducing tax exemptions, and through a more efficient digital administration. We will be working very closely with NADRA that will also upgrade its data systems, and we have established a technical committee to be chaired by the NADRA chair and the FBR chairperson, and I will be working with them inside or outside the technical committee, given that I have to look at other areas of the tax administrative reforms too. Simultaneously, for us, there is need to enhance the efficiency and effectiveness of public expenditures. There is urgent need to improve coordination within the federal government and with provinces and reorient expenditure priorities towards social welfare. I have to share with you that we had established a National Finance Commission that looked at devolution in 2018. In a hasty manner, we devolved a lot of subjects, but also gave away a lot of the share of revenue to the provinces. It's something everybody makes a mistake. All the other countries have also had issues with in terms of the devolution process. It's not an easy thing to do that in a political setup. So we, for right now, cannot introduce a new devolution mechanism. But what we have agreed with the provinces is that we will transfer the provincial components of expenditure back to the provinces, and the federal will take its responsibility and the provinces will. There will be some time lag in this process. As you know, provinces also run this very elaborate Benazir income support program, and they have their own public sector development program under which a lot of projects have been funded by the federation. So they will be transferred to the domain of the provinces over the period in a phased manner. We are open to looking at options with private sector to shift the large infrastructure projects under the PPP mode. Pakistan has some experience in this area, particularly in the Sindh province. We have a PPP center which has done wonders for the province in this area, and it has been ranked as the top 6 by the Euro magazine that I had read some time back. Of course, this will help raise sizable savings on the budgetary resources for both federal and provincial governments. We are looking at ways to enhance allocation of viability gap funding for undertaking infrastructure projects in PPP mode. We are also exploring avenues to seek credit guarantees from InfraZamin. That is an institution that was sponsored by Karandas and the FCDO to enhance private sector investment in infrastructure. And I'm sure Mahin, who's also a speaker on your platform, will elaborate on that. A second major big picture item for you is really a determination to restructure loss-making state-owned enterprises. This also touches on our commitment with the IMF. In a short time, we have been able to not only, of course, the legislation was prepared before we stepped in, but we have developed an SOE policy framework, which has been discussed in 3 rounds at the Cabinet Committee on the State-Owned Enterprises. We are trying to improve the efficiency and functioning of the state-owned enterprises to reduce the drain on the fiscal module. And the government is operationalizing the centralized monitoring unit within Ministry of Finance, and it will monitor the state-owned enterprises, publish regular reports on financial performance and contingent liabilities. There is a lot in the state-owned enterprise policy, which is available on our website. And we are, of course, fast-tracking the privatization of the state-owned companies. The focus, of course, of our policy is to improve the governance and financial efficiency of the top 10 loss-making state-owned enterprises. The privatization program is very ambitious for the period we are in the government. It has been fast-tracked. The financial advisor for PI have been appointed. We are working with the IFC team on concession and management contract for discos. We are also working on operationalization of the Sovereign Wealth Fund, whose legislation was passed by the Parliament before we came. This has already been launched. Its council is headed by the Prime Minister, and I am in the council to support the Prime Minister along with few other cabinet members. We hope to further strengthen this sovereign wealth fund. There are about 7 state-owned companies that have been transferred into the sovereign wealth fund legally, and we will be conducting audits of these companies, and there will be 7-member advisory council, which will be an independent, non-political set of international council members who will set up a non-political board of directors and appoint through competitive process the CEO for this sovereign wealth fund. We will be meeting other sovereign wealth funds and inviting them to discuss how to move forward with their support. Let me move to another important area, which is enhancing competitiveness. We have to really keep this in our big picture. It doesn't happen overnight, but we have to address to be self sufficient. First, we have to mobilize our domestic resources. Then, we have to move towards mobilizing foreign exchange revenue earnings that are purely ours, which means that the only sustainable way to address balance of payment crisis that we end up facing is to address the export port gap. It has to be reduced exclusively through promotion of exports. We can't compress imports because imports are always an important element in our exports. We have to make sure we develop a tax neutrality regime for our exports. And that is why I have recommended to the management of Pakistan for a very high powered tax policy and revenue uh, independent body. Competitiveness of Pakistani exports has to be improved. Our private sector has to play a phenomenal role in it. Any industry that is launching investment should really focus on export orientation. We, of course, have a big domestic market. We have to have import substitution, but I think countries that have progress in Asia Pacific, which has been my home and a ground where I have learned a lot, it's the export orientation that promotes sustainable economic growth. And we want to make sure we continue the path of market-based exchange rate regime that can avoid the overvaluation of local currency. The anti-export policies of the last 3 decades have led to loss of competitiveness of our manufacturing base. Exports have failed to make a transition from low technology to high technology products, as about 70% of the country's exports continue to be low technology products. In addition, the country has failed to diversify its export commodities and its export markets. Textile and clothing sector, which contributes almost about 5% of world trade, dominates the country's exports, which account for 58% of total exports. This I treat as a vulnerability. It's our strength, but it is our vulnerability too, because diversification reduces the vulnerability. Similarly, more than 50% of exports rely on only four markets: USA, EU, China, and Afghanistan. And you know the situation in Afghanistan. So the country has been losing competitiveness in international markets and finds it harder to sell even within its traditional markets. But we want to diversify our markets. Pakistan's loss of competitiveness is evident because our export of goods and services unfortunately declined to 10% of GDP relative to the regional average of about 15 to 19%. To facilitate exports to new markets and encourage the export of new products, we have already operationalized the Exim Bank, which had been lying dormant for almost 3 years in this country. This will bring credit guarantees and insurance products for our exporters in markets where we have not entered. It will encourage them to target new markets for exports. The Export Import Bank is a part of the mandate of Ministry of Finance, and that is why we were able to fast track in the first month of my being in the office here. Another factor for us is the tariff structure that has a significant anti-export bias. Within the tariff policy space, a large number of our regulations distort the trade regime by modifying the notified import duties selectively without any economic justification. Now, during our IMF program, we cannot move um, into adjustments in the rates. We can remove exemptions, but we can't lower the tax rates or the tariffs at this point. But we plan to leave a plan which will guide the future team to be able to achieve this. Of course, we have to find mechanisms to lower the import content because of our balance of payment issues, but we don't want to cut out the imports because imports will lift the game of our exports, and we will be able to recoup the foreign exchange that we deploy for the imports. That's what rest of um, uh, Asia has done, that has really moved towards 70% export orientation in its industry or in its export business. Pakistan has to move from its lowest integration in global value chains to being almost equivalent to our competitors here. Some progress has been achieved in streamlining customs rules and procedure to expedite the clearance of both exports and imports through the single window operations, but more work is needed to achieve international best practices. Today, I have a decision that I had placed before the leadership to separate the customs from the revenue collection mechanism. They will be tracking the smuggling and other elements, while the revenue collection will remain a mandate of FBR. This is a part of restructuring of the FBR, and there will be a notification to this effect sometime next week. There will be more notifications coming out on the restructuring of the FBR. How do we encourage new investment? Some of it I have already laid out, but I think we have to have persistent efforts to reduce the investment saving gap that has grown to be more acute in the last few decades. It has really limited the growth potential of the economy. We have to encourage savings and not encourage consumption. But we are a consumer oriented society, and our economy thrives on consumer orientation, be it big cars or or luxury items that we import um, recklessly without looking at our balance of payment difficulties. But of course, it's a very open, liberal society, so we can't hammer anything and we can't restrict things. So we have to change the incentive regime in order to have higher gains, to have gains of higher GDP growth. You may have heard, and is often a criticism of this special investment facilitation platform. It has been set up to materialize new investments in critical infrastructure and neglected productive sectors of the economy, including agriculture, minerals, IT services. It is promoting corporatization. It has brought the unutilized land, even of the deserts, into exploitation of the agriculture, and it is facilitating G2G arrangements and has successfully executed the first transaction between KPT and AD ports of the UAE for the container terminal at Karachi. We are also looking at few other G2G arrangements. SIFC is also facilitating potential partnership of the Saudi Wealth Fund in the 7 billion Recordec transaction, which you may have heard about. Under the SIFC, a transaction pipeline to expedite investment in critical infrastructure has been developed, and it includes about 10 billion of investments, particularly the Saudi Aramco refinery project and the agriculture corporate farm lease of 85,000 acres of land to potential foreign investors. Let me move to another area, which is the financial inclusion strategy. It is to focus on using digital platforms, non-banking channels to bring financial services to the masses, an area where Pakistan has really achieved some success. Pakistan authorities launched an ambitious national financial inclusion strategy in 2018. An elaborate digital infrastructure is being developed. It has already helped us launch what we call the RAS Payment Gateway in 2021. This is going to be breaking new frontiers because we are connecting RAS to Buna of which will be, the project has already been launched in Dubai, and it will connect us with the GCC market, which is going to be a greater export focus, but also is a hub for the remittances that we have. But this RAST has enabled instant end-to-end digital payments between individuals, businesses, and government entities. So my colleagues out there and our visitors from overseas, let me conclude by telling you that while we may have another 2 months or so, we have in the first quarter of our term, we have undertaken a lot of bold reforms. We will which lay the foundation for a new era of development and prosperity in the country if our reforms are managed well with proper pace and sequence. We need to establish a fast-growing and efficient economy that is capable of creating more quality jobs to absorb its labor force, which is growing very fast, especially as you know, the youth of our country has ambitions and is our precious asset. We are an economy that has to be more self-reliant and yet economically better integrated with economies in the region and beyond. It has to be an economy which is forward and outward looking, willing and capable of attracting investments, dismantling all the barriers that the foreign investor faces, and making sure we are competing for our rightful place in the international trade and commerce business. So thank you, Asfar, for inviting me, and thank you to your delightful audience. I have seen the list. It's an impressive group. I hope I have added some value in terms of bringing what we have been doing in the last 2-3 months here in Islamabad. Over to you,